Hey everyone, it's Ryan back from sonofvin. I hope you've been having a great summer. I know I have. I've been trying so many different wines from all these different states. If you haven't heard or if you haven't seen, I've been doing something called 50 wines from 50 states. Now, technically it's not 50 wines, it's more like 100 wines because I typically do 2 wines from each state. In fact, if you haven't heard about it, this is a nice graphic from what I'm doing right now. It's been pretty cool to try some of these wines. There are some of these states that, you know, they don't necessarily aren't very well known for making great wine. They're not known for making wine in general. Well, they're pulling it off. I mean, little microclimates here and there are allowing some of these states to actually pull off some of the more famous, well-known grapes that are out there for winemaking. While other states are sticking to what they know will work, and they use native grapes, or they use hybrid grapes, or they just use fruit because that's what works. But not every state is a powerhouse like California. California has obviously been synonymous with wine and winemaking for hundreds of years now. It is considered one of the top wine regions in the whole world, and there are so many options to choose from whenever you think of wines from California. But again, as part of what I'm doing, I'm choosing wineries that I've never tried before. It has to be something that I simply have never seen, or I just came across recently, and this is the winery I wanted to do. And if you've seen some of my past videos, I was investigating wineries around Los Angeles, which led me into talking about Mission grape. Mission grape was a Spanish grape that was brought over via the Spanish monks in the mid-1700s when they were first settling into California, and they brought over little cuttings of their vineyard, and Mission took off as the grape for pretty much every winery in Southern California. And I say Southern California because at that time, Southern California was the place to get wine from. If you said I want wine from California in the mid-1700s on into the 1800s, it was coming from SoCal, not NorCal. Yet along the way, slowly but surely, other grapes were attempted to be grown in California, and then the gold rush occurred. And when that happened, so many new immigrants were bringing over other types of grapes. And up in the northern part of California, they were starting to attempt other grapes that were doing very well. And in fact, today's winery is Story Winery. They are located in Amador County, which is just outside of Sacramento, like east of Sacramento. And it has actually been a wine region since the mid-1800s, and I'm guessing probably at that time period, the SoCal area, which was primarily focusing more on Mission grape at the time, was expanding out and planting Mission across the whole state, but more so in the northern part of the state where they're trying other types of grapes as well. So in the case of Story here, they themselves were founded in 1973, they actually plan a mix of a bunch of the newer types at that time period, as well as Mission. So in the 1870s, you had the old standard, the legacy Mission being planted, as well as some of the newer ones like Zinfandel that were being attempted at that time period. So you kind of had a crossing over at this moment in Amador County of the two different worlds of winemaking at that time for California. And over the next several decades, you had the phylloxera epidemic, you had prohibition, you had all of these little things that slowly made winemaking in California die off in so many different ways. And throughout that time period, Mission itself pretty much nearly became extinct in California. It did continue on as a grape in, say, Chile, other places in South America, but as far as SoCal went and NorCal, it didn't really exist anymore. Once Prohibition was over and slowly but surely wine and winemaking was coming back to California, most of the ones that were being focused on now was the newer, now what we call the well-known types of grapes, Cabernet, Zinfandel, Syrah, Pinot, you name it. All of the really famous ones were what people stuck to, and poor old Mission was gutted out tossed, whatever remained that survived, not only phylloxera and as well as prohibition, were being removed. But there were pockets, thankfully, of places that actually still did have mission. And thankfully, this place in Amador County that Story Winery is part of actually still had some mission grape being produced, thankfully. So that actually allows someone like me who's really keen on trying a very old standard of California, like Mission, to be drank. You know, it's not going to be exactly how they had it, say, in the 1800s and 1700s, but it'll still be a representation of a very old vine that had basically the first grape brought over into California. There are native grapes, of course, but as far as what we consider the winemaking grapes of today, this is the very first. The Mission was the very first in California. And at the same time, Zinfandel was planted in that area, and these are some very old Zinfandel vines that are creating their wines. So I thought it'd be really cool to try this because I'd never heard of this winery before, and when I found them and I found they had Mission, I knew I was done. It was over. So anyway, Story Winery, as I just actually found out in the past couple of weeks, has been sold to somebody from the country of Georgia. And he has a history of winemaking, and he loves wine, so it sounds like they're going to be still in good hands. But, you know, as usual, somebody wants to sell because they want to retire and they want to move on. So interesting things to see in the next several years with Story. And anyway, let's check these wines out. I'm curious to see if Mission holds up to its reputation or if it's actually better than what a lot of people say about it. And it's going to be really cool to try some really old vines in. All right, everyone, we're back. So I've had a chance to try both of these wines. And I must say, Mission, as usual, does get a much worse reputation than the wine actually is. Now, it might be because nowadays they're making it better than they used to, and maybe the winemaking process has gotten better, or they're blending it with other grapes more so now. But the reputation it gets in a lot of old literature is if it was just disgusting compared to these new wines that people were bringing in, these new grapes that they were bringing in, and the wines they were producing from these grapes. So I can't really say for certain, but I just know that maybe it's also my ability to taste test versus various wines is not as sharp and as well as, say, a professional. So maybe that's it. I can't say for certain. But in my own opinion, this Mission it's not bad, but I can certainly tell why it had been replaced by other grapes as far as what people prefer. This particular wine it's good. It has kind of an earthy smell to it. There's a few muted fruits to it, but overall it's just kind of lacking whatever it is, that spunk, that thing that makes a wine really taste better. And it has a nice kind of lasting finish to it, very light tannins, kind of medium to mild acid, but it's just kind of a nice wine. It's not great, but it's good enough that I certainly could drink it and have no problems with it. And you know, comparing it to Zinfandel, which came around about 150 years later in California, and how much of this particular region is growing Zinfandel on down into the Central Valley, which is just below it, I believe. Zinfandel, you know, has a much different characteristic. It's much fruitier. It is definitely a lot more acidic than the Mission. Just that amount of fruit I can smell. It has more of a blueberry, strawberry kind of feel to it. And on the tongue and the finish and everything, just definitely there's more of a fruit. You just comparing and contrasting what you get from one and you don't get from the other, you definitely can tell like why people would start steering more towards one grape and slowly phasing out another. As far as Mission goes, there are places in the world that are growing it. Chile is an example, Argentina, Spain, which this originally came over from, is not growing it very much, but the Canary Islands still grows it apparently quite a bit. So there are places you can get it, and there is even some places in Mexico that I think survive the phylloxera, as well as some other parts of the world. But as far as I'm concerned, it's a good enough grape to make wine. There are better, but it shouldn't be treated like the ugly stepchild it is. So anyway, this has been an interesting one for me because I do live in California and I have lots of wine options, but I wanted to try a little bit of the old world wines. But I can say this, that I would continue drinking Mission, and I hope it gets a bit of a comeback, and I'm sure with a little more refinement it can actually be a little better. Who knows? But I've enjoyed both of these wines, and I'm going to keep drinking them, and I hope you enjoyed watching. I will see you next time. Take care.